They threw him into the water, tied by his hands and feet. They dragged him under a ship covered in living blades. His skin was ripped open by rotting wood and razor-sharp shells. And when he finally came out of the sea, they whipped him 150 times. Then, they made him a slave for 2 years. All that, just because he disappeared from the fort for 9 days. Blan didn't die that day, but they stopped treating him like a human. The year was 1652, a Dutch colony at the Cape, far down in southern Africa. The Dutch East India Company didn't forgive mistakes. A missing sailor wasn't an accident. It was desertion, and desertion came with a price. Jan was found alive, but that was the worst thing that could have happened to him. No trial, no questions, no defense. The commander gave the order: keel hauling, whipping, slavery. 3 punishments for 1 act. None of them symbolic. All of them real. All of them brutal. They prepared the ship. A thick rope was pulled under the hull. Jan's wrists and ankles were tied, and they threw him overboard like trash. The rope went tight. His body sank. The dragging began. The bottom of the ship wasn't smooth. It was covered in barnacles, sharp as knives. The wood, full of splinters and rust. Every inch of the ship was a blade, and Jan was dragged across all of it. His chest, his back, his thighs, all started tearing apart. No screams. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. Just sink, twist, and tear. His head smashed against a wooden edge. Blood. Pain. His scalp split open like peeling fruit. The water turned red. The salt rushed into every open wound. It burned more than the cuts. The rope twisted him. His skin scraped again and again against the hull. His flesh was exposed. No skin left. Nothing intact. The dragging lasted less than a minute, but it was enough. When he came out the other side of the ship, he was no longer the same. Unconscious, bleeding, tied up, and they left him hanging there, like a slab of meat. No help, no medicine, just left there, soaked, broken, suspended, as an example. But the punishment wasn't over. They untied him, tied him to a post, and the whipping began. It wasn't a normal whip. It was the cat o' 9 tails. 9 braided ropes with knots and splinters. Each strike didn't just cut. It ripped flesh. He was given 150 of them. The first ones made him tremble. By the 10th, his back had no skin left. By the 20th, his muscles began to spasm on their own. By the 30th, his body started shutting down. But he didn't pass out. He was still conscious. And they kept hitting him. Some sailors looked away. Others stared in silence. Everyone knew this wasn't justice. It was a warning. A lesson, and everyone knew they could be next. By the 100th strike, Jan was no longer screaming. His body was just an open sack. Every lash hit raw, bleeding flesh. Nothing left untouched. By the 150th, they let him drop to the ground like a wet rag. No words, no bandages, just a rough cloth thrown over him and some shade. That was it. He wasn't dead yet, but the 3rd punishment was still waiting. 2 years of slavery. And here's where you pause for a second. Because if you've made it this far, it means you know this story is real, it's horrifying, and it deserves to be told. So do your part, leave a like, drop a comment, and most of all, hit that subscribe button. Because what's coming next is even darker. Jan survived the dragging. He survived the 150 lashes, but his body was left open. No antibiotics, no medicine, no understanding of infection. What was coming wasn't more pain. It was gangrene, fever, slow death. His flesh was filled with salt, algae, old blood, and dust. His wounds began to swell, turn black. You could smell the rot before it killed him. But no one helped. No one cared. Because to them, he wasn't a man anymore. He was walking punishment. And if you think this was just a one-time thing, you're wrong. This was only the beginning. In the Dutch East India Company, your past didn't matter. It didn't matter if you had served with loyalty, fought for the flag, or spent years at sea. One mistake, one absence, and you became an example. A warning. Just like Jan. His body was already broken, but he was still breathing, and that meant he could still serve. 2 years of slavery. Not as a prisoner, as a tool, as an object. No one looked him in the eyes. No one called him by name. He was just the deserter. The one who survived. The one who shouldn't have. They gave him the hardest tasks. Hauling barrels, scrubbing decks, lifting crates heavier than his own weight, all with open wounds. No treatment, no rest. Sometimes he collapsed. They kicked him to make him stand, forced him to keep going. Because a punishment doesn't end. It's stretched, drained, until there's nothing left. And Jan wasn't the only one. Not the first. Not the last. Others went missing too. Some never returned. But those who did suffered the same or worse. One was dragged under the ship twice. Another died before the whip even touched him. One more was tied up and thrown into the sea without a rope, just to see if he'd float. The company stood for order, yes, but also for fear. Absolute control. Punishments weren't handed out for justice. They were given to remind you who you belonged to draw a line. And if anyone forgot that line, they just had to look at Jan. And when someone was punished, everyone watched. Everyone stood still, because looking away was insubordination, and watching without fear was suspicious. No one spoke of what happened, because words were dangerous too. Speaking could mean betrayal, and betrayal meant rope, fire, or the sea. They stole everything from January. His skin, his strength, his name. But he still had one thing left. Time. And in that place, time wasn't a gift. It was a trap. Any day could be the last. But death never came. Every night, sweating from fever, shaking from pain, he hoped his body would just give up. But it didn't. Because death was the only thing the company didn't control. At least, not always. People saw Jan walking through the fort like a ghost. Hunched over, slow, feet wrapped in bloody cloth. He didn't speak. He didn't sleep well. He had nightmares while awake. Sometimes he'd stand still for hours, staring at the ground. But if he didn't move, they kicked him. Because even his pain had to be useful. He ate just enough not to die. Slept on wet planks. Every day, they gave him new tasks. Unloading rotten fish, cleaning up drunk officers' vomit, picking rat bones out of food stores. Jobs not even the local slaves were given. But Jan got them. Because he wasn't a slave, he was a punishment. The other sailors avoided him. Some out of fear, others out of guilt. One whispered to him, "I was the one pulling the rope." Jan didn't answer, just looked at him. One eye half closed, face swollen. The sailor never spoke to him again. And so the days dragged on. Slow, heavy. His body was rotting from the inside. Some wounds never healed. They split open just from walking. Flies swarmed him. Pieces of his skin hung like wet paper. At night, the fever soaked his straw mattress so bad it began to rot. But no one replaced it. There's a note in the colony's records, written by a lieutenant. The deserter is still breathing, though it'd be better if he wasn't. He smells like rotten flesh and walks like a lost soul. It's unsettling to have him around. That fear was exactly what they wanted. Because Jan wasn't just a punishment. He was a tool of control, a walking warning, a body that screamed without sound, saying, "This is what happens when you break the rules. When you run, when you hide, when you think for yourself." He was living propaganda, and that worked better than any speech, any threat, any flag. Because screams fade, but the image of a destroyed man, that stays in your head forever. Jan's body no longer worked like it used to, but they kept using it. They forced him to lift barrels, push carts, carry sacks heavier than him. Sometimes he fell. Sometimes his old wounds bled again. Sometimes he threw up from the pain. But that wasn't an excuse, just proof he was still alive. And that was enough to keep working him. He had no name. No one called him January. No one spoke to him directly. He was him, the deserter, the punished. They pointed at him like a dirty object, like you could catch his punishment just by looking at him. But the worst part wasn't the pain, or the fever, or the beatings. The worst part was knowing no one wanted him alive, or dead, just present. A stain no one could clean, but no one dared to erase. Some said he smelled like a grave. Others claimed they heard him whispering at night in a language that wasn't his. One swore they saw his eyes roll back, mumbling to something that wasn't there. Madness was his only escape. One day, without warning, they sent him to clean the salt cellar. A closed room. No windows. No light. They left him locked inside for 3 days. No water. No food. When they pulled him out, he couldn't walk. His tongue was swollen. His eyes dry. His skin clung to his bones. They said he deserved it, that he had insulted an officer. But no one had heard him speak. Did it matter? No. In that place, the truth was whatever the bosses said. And the worst part, most of the sailors accepted it. Not because they were cruel, but because they were afraid. Because after seeing so much punishment, You stop knowing what's normal and what's monstrous. And once that happens, the system has already won. Jan stopped being human. And with him, so did everyone else. Because if one man can be treated like this, then no one is safe. He kept breathing, day after day, month after month. His body was falling apart, but they kept him upright, like a corpse being used to scare the living. They didn't kill him. They displayed him. Because fear is more effective when it has eyes, hands, and scars that speak louder than words. He became a shadow, a symbol, a line, the limit between what you could do and what you should never try. His presence said one thing: if you ever think of running, remember this. And that's how he disappeared. Not suddenly, not with a gunshot, not with a final order. Jan Blan faded slowly. First, he stopped speaking. Then, he stopped moving normally. Next, he stopped reacting to pain. And finally, one day, he stopped breathing. No exact date, no report, just silence. A blank space in the task list. A filthy rag no one saw again. Some said he was buried in an unmarked hole. Others believed he was dumped in the sea like garbage. But no one really knows. And no one asked, because asking was dangerous too. That was his final fate, to be forgotten. What remained was his punishment, his story, his broken body, and the fear he left behind. But you're here now, watching, listening, remembering, and that alone breaks the silence they try to keep. So if you believe stories like this shouldn't be forgotten, do something. Like the video, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe. This channel tells the stories others are too afraid to tell. Without filters, without fear. Someone has to do it, and the next story will be even harder to swallow. So if you're brave enough, stay. Because what's coming next will leave you speechless.